Hi, I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and this is the story of how leaving my cushy job at one of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies led me to develop a treatment that would save not only my ex-boss's daughter, but thousands of other lives too. Sometimes the hardest decisions we make turn out to be the most important ones. I still remember that rainy Tuesday morning when I walked into James Sterling's corner office at Sterling Pharmaceuticals. The Manhattan skyline loomed gray and imposing through the floor-to-ceiling windows, matching his expression as I handed him my resignation letter. "You're making a mistake, Sarah," he said, barely glancing at the letter before tossing it aside. His custom-made Italian suit seemed to radiate disapproval. "We're about to promote you to head of research. Corner office, 7-figure salary, full benefits. Why throw that away?" I took a deep breath. "Because we're not pursuing the research that matters, James. That rare disease program I proposed." "Not this again," he cut me off, rubbing his temples. "We've been over this. Rare diseases aren't profitable. We stick to blockbuster drugs. Cholesterol, diabetes, hair loss. That's what pays for these views." He gestured at the Manhattan skyline. "People are dying, James. Children are dying. And we have the resources to help them." He leaned back in his leather chair, studying me with that condescending smile I'd grown to hate over the past 5 years. "Listen, Sarah. You're brilliant. It's why I hired you straight out of Harvard Med. But you're naive. This is business, not charity. If you want to help kids, donate to Street Jude's." I stood my ground. "I'm starting my own research company, focusing on rare genetic disorders." That's when he actually laughed. A sharp, cruel sound that echoed off his office walls. "With what money? What labs? What connections? The board won't even take your calls without my approval." "I have savings," I said quietly, "and I have my research." "Your research?" His eyebrows shot up. "You mean all those after-hours projects you've been working on?" "Company property, Dr. Mitchell. All of it." I smiled then, and something in my expression made his confidence waver. "Check your contracts, Mr. Sterling. All after-hours research using personal resources belongs to the researcher. It's in the employment agreement your father wrote 30 years ago. Nobody ever changed it." His face darkened. "You've been planning this." "For 2 years," I admitted. "Ever since you shut down the pediatric research division to focus on a new hair loss treatment." He stood up, towering over his mahogany desk. "You'll fail. You know that, right? Playing scientist in some garage lab while we develop real treatments. In 6 months, you'll be begging for your job back." I walked to the door, then turned back one last time. "Goodbye, James. I truly hope you never need the treatments I'm going to develop." The next few months were exactly as hard as James had predicted. I sold my apartment and moved into a tiny studio in Queens. My dining table became my desk, my kitchen counter my first lab. Every penny of my savings went into equipment and research. But I had something James didn't understand. I had a breakthrough. Those late nights at Sterling Labs hadn't been wasted. I discovered a potential treatment pathway for a group of rare genetic disorders that affected protein folding in children. The traditional treatments only managed symptoms. My approach could actually cure the disease. I called my company Mitchell Genetics, and our first lab was indeed in a garage. But not for long. My research caught the attention of Dr. Helen Zhang, a brilliant geneticist who'd been quietly funding promising startups. "This protein folding approach," she said during our first meeting, peering at my data through her round glasses. "It's revolutionary. How did Sterling let this go?" "They didn't let it go," I explained. "They never knew about it." 6 months later, we had a real lab. Small, but state-of-the-art. A team of dedicated scientists who shared my vision. We were making progress, publishing promising preliminary results in top journals. Then came the call that changed everything. It was a Tuesday again, exactly 1 year after I'd walked out of Sterling Pharmaceuticals. My assistant put the call through before realizing who it was. "Sarah?" James Sterling's voice had lost its arrogant edge. He sounded older, desperate. "I need your help. It's Emma, my daughter." I sat down hard in my office chair. Emma Sterling was 6 years old. I'd met her at company picnics, a bright, energetic child with her father's confidence and her mother's kind eyes. "What's wrong with Emma, James?" His voice broke. "The doctors. They're calling it Mitchinson's disease. Some rare genetic thing. They say she has less than a year." My hands started shaking. Mitchinson's disease, the exact condition my treatment was designed to cure. Sarah, are you there? Look, I know I was awful to you, but please, she's my little girl. I looked at my computer screen where the latest trial results glowed hopefully, then at the photo on my desk, me and my team celebrating our first successful lab trial. Come to my office tomorrow, James, I said quietly, and bring Emma's medical records. The line went silent for a moment. Your office? You mean you actually have a company? Yes, James, I have a company, and you better pray my playing scientist has paid off. The Mitchell Genetics lobby wasn't as grand as Sterling Pharmaceuticals' marble entrance, but it had something more valuable: hope. Our walls were covered with research posters and thank you letters from families of rare disease patients. James Sterling stood in the middle of it all, his usual commanding presence diminished by worry. Emma clung to his hand, smaller and paler than I remembered. Her mother, Victoria, stood on her other side, designer handbag clutched like a shield. The confident family I'd known had been replaced by terrified parents facing their worst nightmare. Dr. Mitchell will see you now, my assistant announced, and I noticed James flinch slightly at my title. He'd always called me Sarah, or just Mitchell, deliberately casual despite my medical degree. My office was what he'd probably consider modest, all functional furniture and research files rather than expensive art. But the view of our lab through the glass wall behind my desk showed state-of-the-art equipment that even Sterling Pharmaceuticals would envy. Hello, Emma. I smiled at the little girl. Would you like to see something cool while I talk to your parents? She nodded shyly. I pressed a button on my desk. Dr. Chen, could you show Emma the glowing proteins? My lead researcher appeared, her kind face lighting up at the sight of Emma. We have some proteins that glow like fireflies, she told Emma. Want to see? After Emma left with Dr. Chen, I turned to James and Victoria. I've reviewed Emma's medical records. Mitchinson's disease is aggressive, protein misfolding leading to progressive cellular damage. Traditional treatments are largely ineffective. Victoria began to cry softly. James gripped her hand. However, I continued, turning my computer screen toward them. We've been developing a treatment specifically for protein misfolding disorders. A gene therapy approach that actually corrects the underlying mutation. James leaned forward, his Wall Street training kicking in. How experimental is this? What are the success rates? I pulled up our trial data. We've had successful trials in animal models. Human trials were set to begin next quarter. But I met his desperate eyes. We could fast-track Emma's case. Apply for compassionate use authorization. Fast-track? Victoria whispered. How long would that take? 2 months for approval, then 3 months of treatment. I watched their faces fall. Emma's doctors gave her a year. This is her best chance. James stood up suddenly, pacing my office. I don't understand. The report said you were years away from any viable treatments. Our analysts, your analysts, I interrupted gently, haven't seen inside our labs. We've kept our breakthroughs quiet until patents were secured. I pulled out a thick file. Speaking of which, all our patents were approved last week. We own this treatment protocol outright. He stopped pacing. How much? Excuse me? How much to buy the patents? Name your price. Sterling Pharmaceuticals will acquire the treatment, fast-track it through our channels. No. The word hung in the air between us. James Sterling looked like I'd slapped him. No. He repeated incredulously. Sarah, be reasonable. We have resources, connections. The same resources and connections you said I'd never have. I kept my voice level. The same connections you threatened to turn against me. No, James. Mitchell Genetics will develop this treatment. We'll save Emma and hundreds of other children like her. Children you said weren't profitable enough to help. Victoria stood up, her tear-stained face suddenly fierce. James, what is she talking about? I watched my former boss struggle to maintain his composure as his wife stared him down. It was business, he muttered. The board. It was wrong. Victoria cut him off. Then she turned to me. Dr. Mitchell, please. Help our daughter. Whatever it takes. I opened my laptop and began typing. The compassionate use paperwork is already prepared. I'll need your signatures. And James. I looked up at the man who'd once laughed me out of his office. I'll need your word that Sterling Pharmaceuticals won't interfere with our other research programs. He nodded slowly, the last of his arrogance crumbling. You have it. Just, safer, please. As if on cue, Emma's laughter floated through my office door. She was watching our glowing proteins through a microscope. Her face lit up with wonder. "We start tomorrow," I said firmly. "But understand this, Emma won't be our only patient. Every child with Mitchinson's disease deserves this chance." James sank into his chair, looking at his daughter through the glass walls. "I was wrong," he whispered, "about everything. But this wasn't about vindication. We had a life to save. And what happened next would change not just Emma's future, but the entire landscape of rare disease treatment." The next 3 months were a blur of lab work, regulatory meetings, and anxious moments watching Emma's vital signs. Our entire team worked around the clock, knowing that this wasn't just about saving one little girl, it was about proving that our treatment could work. I'll never forget the day we administered the first dose. Emma sat bravely in the treatment chair, her parents hovering nearby, as Dr. Chen prepared the injection. "Will it hurt?" Emma asked, clutching her favorite stuffed unicorn. "Just a tiny pinch," I promised. "And guess what? The medicine glows just like those proteins we showed you." She smiled weakly. "Like fireflies?" "Exactly like fireflies." James and Victoria held each other's hands so tight their knuckles were white. 3 months of treatment lay ahead, and every day would be a battle against time. The first signs of improvement came 2 weeks later. Emma's protein levels began to stabilize. By week 6, her cellular degradation had slowed significantly, but it was week 9 when we knew we'd made history. "The mutated proteins are being replaced by normal ones," Dr. Chen announced during our daily review. "The gene therapy is actually working." Victoria burst into tears. James just stood there, staring at the test results as if they might disappear. Word got out, as it always does in the medical community. Other families with children suffering from Mitchinson's disease began contacting us. Then came the media attention. "Revolutionary treatment saves Sterling Harris," read one headline. "Mitchell Genetics, the startup changing rare disease treatment," read another. But the real moment of triumph came 3 months into Emma's treatment. She was sitting in our lab's break room, coloring a picture, when one of our researchers dropped a stack of papers. Emma jumped up to help gather them, and everyone in the room froze. 2 months ago, she barely had the strength to walk. Now she was moving like any healthy 6-year-old. "The papers shouldn't be on the floor," she said matter-of-factly. "They're important." James, who'd been watching through the glass wall, turned to me with tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't deserve, after how I treated you." I cut him off. "This isn't about you, James, or me, it's about them." I pointed through the glass, where Emma was now teaching our lead researcher how to draw a unicorn. The next week, James called a board meeting at Sterling Pharmaceuticals. I was surprised to receive an invitation. Mitchell Genetics has proven that rare disease research isn't just ethically necessary, it's commercially viable, he announced to the stunned board members. "I'm proposing a complete restructuring of our research priorities, starting with a $2 billion rare disease initiative." The boardroom erupted in protests. James held up his hand. "And to lead this initiative," he continued, "I'm proposing a partnership with Mitchell Genetics. Equal partnership with Dr. Mitchell retaining full autonomy over research directions." He turned to me. "That is, if you'll accept." I looked around the familiar boardroom. The same people who dismissed my ideas 2 years ago were now waiting anxiously for my response. "On one condition," I said. "The treatment protocols we develop will be accessible to everyone who needs them, regardless of ability to pay." "Agreed," James said immediately. "We'll establish a foundation to cover costs for families who can't afford treatment." Today, 5 years later, Mitchell Genetics operates the largest rare disease research network in the world. We've developed treatments for 12 previously unprofitable conditions. Emma Sterling is a healthy 11-year-old who dreams of becoming a scientist. The original garage where I started my company, we turned it into a museum, showing aspiring researchers that great achievements often have humble beginnings. James and Victoria Sterling are now among our biggest advocates. The Sterling Foundation has helped thousands of families access life-saving treatments. And that corner office James once offered me? It's now a pediatric research lab. Yesterday, I received a letter from a young doctor with an innovative treatment idea. Her hospital had turned her down, saying it wasn't commercially viable. I thought about that rainy Tuesday when I'd walked away from security and into uncertainty. About Emma drawing unicorns in her break room. About all the children who are alive today because someone dared to challenge the status quo. My response was simple. Come see me tomorrow. Bring your research, because sometimes the most important breakthroughs come from those who refuse to accept unprofitable as an answer. As I sit in my office, watching our researchers work through the glass wall, I can't help but smile. On my desk sits a framed drawing, a slightly crooked unicorn, signed by Emma Sterling. Beside it stands a small jar of proteins that still glow like fireflies. They say success is the best revenge, but I've learned it's not about revenge at all. It's about remembering why you started something in the first place. It's about all the lives you can change if you just refuse to give up. Last week, James asked me if I ever regret not taking that corner office job he'd offered. I pointed to our lab, where dozens of researchers were working on tomorrow's breakthroughs. To the wall of photos showing children who are alive because we dared to try, to Emma's unicorn drawing. Some views, I told him, are worth more than a Manhattan skyline. And in the end, that's what matters. Not the victories over those who doubted you, but the lives you change along the way. Because sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come not from proving others wrong, but from proving hope right.